All right, hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Goethe's Maxims, where we're going to go through the maxims that the great Goethe left us, see what pearls of wisdom we can find from it in our contemporary age. How are you, Kev?
I'm doing great. Yeah. Um,
This is our take 2, so hopefully everything stays fine. Um, been a while since we last did one of these, so it should be good to get into them. I was going to whittle off some of the ones we had previously that just stood out, because it's always nice to retain something from these exercises. First stream, I think we had the best one was behavior is a mirror in which everyone shows his image. And then that was from Otley's diaries. From Art and Antiquity, we had ones such as work makes the journeyman, wisdom is to be found only in truth, the smallest hair casts its shadow, dirt glitters when the sun happens to shine. I think that was one I quite liked.
yeah, that is a good one.
And we'll get on to, we're still on Art and Antiquity, but we're on it. It was like a periodical, so there's different parts of into which he was entering it, and we broke at the end of volume 3, so we're on to volume 4, issue 2 of his Art and Antiquity, called Own and Assimilated Material from 1823, and we're on maxim number 167. We all live on the past and perish by the past. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with it. It's kind of a nature, well, not nature versus nurture, but I'm trying to understand what he means by perish by the past.
That's what I'm thinking as well. The live by the past, I think, comes easier to you, doesn't it, than the perish. I suppose we perish by the past in the idea that perhaps we inherit the faults of our fathers, sort of thing. Perhaps you can think about that more broadly. So you sort of like there is these faults that are inherent to us, or inherited by us.
Maybe it's like the last generation left its stamp on this generation, which left a kind of a trajectory that was fated for the current generation. There's only a certain range because of the cultural influences that this generation can achieve.
So you're thinking of a sort of natural decay, that the past,
not necessarily, but
horizon vanishes to a certain generation.
Or the trajectory of what we can do is dictated to us by what our forebears have done. So even if
we can also be limited by that.
And even if it's like we're rebelling against what, say, our parents have done, or it's still a reaction to that. So everything that we do is shaped by what has happened.
Yeah, it's certainly not the tabula rasa. I don't think Goethe would be a fan of anyone who thought that that was possible.
It's exactly the opposite, right?
I think we both largely agree with it, though. The past just casts this enormous shadow over all of our lives, as you say, whether you wanted to or not. The next one I had was 176. You can neither protect nor defend yourself against criticism. You have to act in defiance of it, and this is gradually accepted. I'm not sure I agree with that.
Well, it's kind of like if you, it's like, I can't remember the exact saying now, but it's like if you throw mud on it'll stick, you know. So there's no way of, you're just going to get yourself more dirty by defending. You just have to ignore it, I think, is what he's trying to say.
It should really depend on who's giving you the criticism, though.
Right. Well,
You
I
know?
suppose he's talking about gossip.
Yes. Well, I would say gossip slightly different to criticism. Then criticism can be constructive. I wouldn't always be dismissive, but there are times in which, yeah, if someone's, the critics are going to come, sort of thing, with the claws out, and you have to just be above them, stride above them, stride through it. I can certainly see that angle to it.
But maybe he's talking artistically as well. Not only about gossip or whatever, but
He probably sees the art critic as a sort of degenerative form from the artists themselves.
Maybe.
He always holds the artist quite high in his regard, in his esteem.
That's right. Yeah.
I also have the next one. The crowd cannot do without efficient people and always finds efficiency burdensome.
What do you think he means by efficient?
They cannot do without efficient people. I suppose there's an agitation to get things done that people find, especially in a populace. There's a grievance that this isn't, that this thing is poor. For instance, like today, in today's age, you can say the council doesn't do this or that, with the way a bins are collected or something, and they always want this to be done more efficiently. But then, if it was actually, some things can be done efficiently, that those people who are agitating for it could find burdensome, because efficiency takes discipline and practice and regularity, and also an element of intrusion into their lives.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think that's what he means by it. Yeah, I agree.
So it's like, they want everything to be fixed for them, but then they don't like the intrusion element of it that comes from that.
Mm-hmm. Or the responsibility that would come from doing it.
Responsibility, yeah, that's probably a good way of thinking about it from a sort of traditional standpoint. 183, beauty is a manifestation of secret natural laws, which without this appearance would have remained eternally hidden from us. This is quite aesthetic, right?
Yeah.
And also naturalist. Do you agree with what he's saying here about beauty? It's always a difficult thing to put into words, right? Our experience of beauty.
Well, it's kind of Platonic.
The secret natural law being sort of like the idea of forms.
Hidden.
So,
yeah.
Of course, you can poke holes in that, right? Like, the laws are revealed to us that are not necessarily revealed via beauty. Beauty is like something that can be revealed that we do begin to appreciate, but I don't think it's the only way that secret natural laws could be revealed to the human. Do you think that's what he's saying? That he thinks that beauty is the only avenue?
I don't think he said only.
He says without which.
Yeah, that's. Well, I was confused. Does he mean without which? Is he talking about the individual instance of the appreciation, like, or just in general? So.
I don't know. I think I did highlight it, though, to remind oneself of that there is a truth in beauty, and that it does reveal something to us. We see today's age so much this, you can be beautiful no matter what, and a sort of collapse in standards, or a collapse in the appreciation of beauty. Sorry?
A relativism in aesthetics.
Yes.
It's simply it's completely relative, and no standards can be decreed or understood, or yeah.
So it's been pretty strong traditionalist stuff so far. I mean, he opened with we live by the past, we perish by the past. And now he's talking about that the beauty as an inherent truth, which is revealing natural laws to us. So that's also quite romantic as well. Someone like Shelley probably would have agreed with that, even though you couldn't call him a traditionalist. The next one I have is 189. Anyone who devotes himself to the sciences suffers, firstly, through retardations and then through preoccupations. To begin with, people are reluctant to admit the value of what we are providing. Later on, they act as though they already knew what we might be able to provide. I think this kind of ties in with the crowd cannot do without efficient people and always find efficiency burdensome. I think he plays on these with some of the maxims, these hypocrisies that the multitude sometimes reveal in wanting something, and then when the instance occurs, either finding it burdensome, or in this case, saying, "Well, that was always obvious that you were going to provide that," and it's not a recognition of what it took to get there.
Hindsight is 2020. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that's a fair assessment, or is that being like a bit too harsh on crowds?
No, I think it's fair.
People are reluctant to admit the value of what we are providing. See, so he says like a sort of we with an artist. He's saying we with a scientist here. He certainly is.
He was kind of both, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think he
more
operated
of an artist.
He operated in those last few decades of science, where you could sort of be a man with sort of curiosity in your leisure time, and sort of just go about investigating something. In Goethe, it's morphology, but I'm thinking of even there was a Lord Cavendish who came up with an estimate in the late 18th century, an estimate for the gravitational constant G, and I think he was literally just swinging very long, extended, taut cannonballs, from strings in his house, in his country manor and stuff. He's kind of at the tail end of that element of science, where the laboratory is actually just your leisurely, mannerly home, and you're just doing these sort of curious investigations and seeing where it leads to. I wonder what he'd make of today's scientists or today's artists.
I think he'd be actually a lot harsher on the artists.
Do you think so? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I feel like he would see contemporary art as completely alien to any art he would have like it doesn't follow the same tradition as I guess the sciences. He probably would have been stimulated by all the progress that has been made, and the fact that they are still following the philosophy of science to a large degree. It's pretty much the same, if not more like kind of logical positivist or whatever.
Would he not find the advances of science perhaps to such a degree that it would be as alienating as where the art has gone?
No, I don't think so. I hope not, but I think he would be maybe critical of certain scientific outlooks in regard to the larger world, but a scientific outlook within the realms of science, I don't think he would have a problem with. He'd be critical of science in its overreaching, like people.
I think he would
scientific opinions about things that aren't scientific.
Yeah, I think he would spot that overreach, because you go back there and his idea of what beauty is, whereas if you strip that down to the mere materialist scientific approach, they're like, well, the rays you're seeing from the rainbow are actually just these electromagnetic waves, and they're spread out like this. They're going through this sort of dispersion or this sort of refraction. And I think that wouldn't satisfy him enough,
Right.
in his conception of beauty. So that's the last one I have from volume 4. Volume 5, issue 1, is called Individual Points and was published a year later in 1824. And the first one I have from that is 232. It is of the greatest delight to see how, in the Apollo room of the Villa Aldobrandini in Frascati, Domenico has placed Ovid's Metamorphosis in the most fitting surroundings. And in this connection, we like to remember that our experience of the most joyful events is doubly blissful if vouchsafed to us in a splendid landscape. Indeed, that moments which were in themselves indifferent are raised to high significance by a worthy setting. So very much about the importance of place in our experience of, I suppose, a high emotional resonance. I think I highlighted that because I think we all have had that experience that, you remove the setting from it, even though the setting mightn't be crucial to the basic events that's in your memory.
Yeah.
If you stripped away the setting, suddenly that memory would not be the same, really. It wouldn't evoke the same feelings.
Well, yeah, that's like a certain smell or a certain sense will trigger a memory, a certain taste, and I suppose it kind of connects back to childhood or whatever. You think about it brings back previous encounters with that sense.
Do you think the other that there's the antithesis to that, where a setting can still work as profoundly on events we don't like? Because he specifically calls out joyful events here, being doubly blissful. Do you think a setting?
I'm sure. Say if you went through a certain trauma, and there was a certain, I don't know, smell or aesthetic thing that would like, say, even the architecture or something, even it could be something small, and that may bring back those
Horrible memories. I think it could still work, but I actually don't think it works as well, because I think when you're having a joyful experience, you're sort of, there's that saying that you're radiant, and that you're very outward looking, you're encompassing all of the surroundings more, because you yourself are sort of radiating that joy, whereas a negative experience is often quite isolating, or you are stripping yourself away from your surroundings because you're in a sort of either a depressed state or some sort of
right.
I suppose if you're talking about, like, you see something grotesque and you pure horror, that's quite different. But if you're talking about something that's an isolated depression, that will be a strip away. Like darkness isolates us.
Like just walking around a lot of modern cities will trigger the antithesis you're talking about.
Walking around the city,
like a lot of like a lot of modern cities are. It's quite a very
Yeah. Okay. So you're thinking of like Blade Runner aesthetic, is it? Where you're sort of walking around your own mini dystopia, but setting is quite key.
I'm thinking of walking around like just an urban glass environment.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think I was going for light being enveloping and darkness being isolating, but you make a good point. So I'll let you have that one. 236. Truth is a torch, but a monstrously huge one. which is why we are all just intent on getting past it, our eyes blinking as we go, even terrified of getting burnt. Truth is a torch. What do you think of that?
Sure. I mean, it's
Lord said, "Let there be light." I mean, he's kind of going on that sort of motif, right?
yeah. Are you saying it's truth is too large for us to constantly look at? Kind of have to always.
That's the huge torch.
Turn.
Is that not the sun then at that point, right? Which is kind of our earliest
Well,
notation.
I think he's really. I suppose I would be thinking like almost like an Olympic Greek torch, I think, but a huge one and something almost too big to bear. So you have to like constantly turn away from it, and then look at it again. You can't continuously be in search of. It's exhausting.
It's kind of a better way of
Too much.
that famous thing. You can't handle the truth. You want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Sort of because it's blinding. You got to look away from it.
Yeah, not only blinding, but I feel like the metaphor it's too heavy to carry, like to carry that huge torch.
Like Atlas carrying the weight of the world.
Yeah, like it's on a gigantic, not on a human scale.
Let's go to 241. The person engaged in action is always unconscionable. No one except the contemplative has a conscience.
Yeah,
I think both are important in life. But yes, obviously when you're doing, there's less time for thinking. And you work far more on instinct.
yeah, but I mean, also you do see like guilt and consideration and all those things in the moment. So I don't know how true that is. I think
But
it's
I would say
it's
they're emotional responses rather than contemplative thought
right.
process.
Yeah, but there is a kind of there's also like when you do something that maybe you know you shouldn't do. There is you are conscious of it often.
I would argue that's almost an instinctive morality. There are some parts of morals that maybe need to be taught more, but some are instinctual, I would say. And then that's what you're.
How about doing the wrong thing and being aware it's the wrong thing and doing it anyway?
And you do it anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, this was all in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. He classified them all different ways, and I've forgotten. It's been too long since I've read it.
I think that's the worst. It's in the Christian sense. It's the most biggest.
Because I do remember reading that chapter in Aristotle, and he's like, "Now we've covered this one," and you're kind of like, "Oh yeah, okay, he has covered everything." And then you just like turn the page, like, "But what if you know it's wrong, do wrong?" It's like, but then how do you know how did you know you were doing wrong? Like, was there a conscious moment in there? And then you're like, oh shit.
Well, it's in the preparation for doing the act that you know to be wrong.
Yes, I wish I'd read up on that a bit now because the terms are quite good. It's like, yeah, there is, and he does classify them differently. If you know you're doing something wrong, it's far worse, from his ethical standpoint than the sort of more instinctual ones I was getting at earlier. So okay, I'll give you that. If Aristotle can find a distinction between the two, I'll allow Goethe to also have one. I'm just going back to how he phrased it. The person engaged in action is always unconscionable. So you're saying no. There is like a brief momentary consciousness, but maybe
I would say this is
an infinitesimal.
I would say this what he's saying is true in many instances, but not in every instance.
Yeah,
that's my critique. That's my problem.
Fair. Should a maxim cover most instances?
Well, you shouldn't say always. You shouldn't say always if it's not always.
Fair. 246. Just as out of habit, so habit is still on sort of Aristotelian hat on. One consults a rundown clock as though it were still going. So too one may look at the face of a beautiful woman as though she were still in love. I don't know what was on his mind when he penned this one.
I know exactly the sense of like looking at a clock, a broken clock, just instantaneously.
It's a bit different than comparing someone to a summer's day. Shall I compare thee to a rundown clock?
No, but I think he's talking about like look, like it's so he knows that they are no longer love, but he looks for an instant as if to hope that they were, just for an instant.
Yeah, you'd have to be quite familiar with seeing the love come back to you, though, right? Because you're familiar with the clock displaying time for you. That it is, as he calls it, it's habituated.
I think it's a good.
Like it's not something you'd look for in a stranger or any beautiful
Similar.
woman.
Yeah.
Something you'd look for in someone you already had an experience with, I would say.
Yeah. No, I think that one works very well.
250. Art can be furthered by no one except the master. Benefactors further the artist. That's right and proper. But that is not always the way art is furthered. It's funny here, we talked just a bit ago about Woody, which one we probably find more disgust or amazement in, the science of today or the art of today. And it's just weird that the language he's using here is like he is talking about art being furthered, whereas we in our discussion
in terms of progress
only talk about science being furthered.
Right.
So even the way he's using his language here shows us how alienating it has become.
Yeah.
But would you agree with that?
I would say furthered, like, so it's from A to B. It's linear, but it has a, and the problem, the reason why that doesn't work with contemporary art is it doesn't have an A to B. It just has a B. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, what's the B?
It just has a start. It just has a starting
present, no reference
starting
point.
Yeah. Maybe it has like very quite modern points.
Here's one for you in terms of interpreting this. Does he mean art can be furthered by no one except the master? Does he mean that only someone who is a master can further art, or even if you are not seen as a master, the minute you've furthered art, like you have effectively become one? You know what I mean? Like you can.
Oh well, I think
you don't have to be the established master.
You could view it in both ways, but I prefer the second way, because think of like Gothic cathedrals, or many like kind of folk arts or whatever, and there is a mastery in that, but none of them would be in the canonical geniuses of art, right? So
yes, well, those cathedrals took years to build and cultivate, so you would probably say there was a mastery involved in getting to that point.
Generations, even. Yeah.
Sorry, generations, yes. Centuries. Volume 5, Issue 2. It's still in the individual points, but he took a break and then came back to it. 262. To live in the realm of ideas means treating the impossible as though it were possible. Same goes for character. If the two coincide, events follow from which the world's astonishment takes centuries to recover. Will I go through it again? There's a bit I don't want to digest that. To live in the realm of ideas means treating the impossible as though it were possible. Okay. Same goes for character. If the two coincide, events follow from which the world's astonishment takes centuries to recover. And he leads that straight into 263. Right? Where do you think he's going? He's going to name a character.
Napoleon.
Yeah. Would you have guessed Napoleon, or did you just see it?
I actually thought Napoleon. Yeah, I thought Napoleon.
Well, it's exactly where he's going. I suppose you're thinking of Goethe's life as well. Who's going to leave that mark on him? He says then in 263, Napoleon, who lived wholly in a realm of ideas, which I kind of disagree with. I think there was certainly a practicality to that man on the battlefield and so on, was, however, incapable of a conscious grasp of this realm being of ideas. He completely repudiates everything ideological in denying all reality, while all the time eagerly intent on realizing it. But his clear, incorruptible intellect cannot bear perpetual inner contradiction of this kind, and it is most important when he is, as it were, impelled to talk about this matter in a characteristic and most attractive way. So I think here he's sort of reeling from his correspondence with Napoleon, right? He's just trying to grapple with, you can think of Carlyle's great man theory, and the light living fountain, like something. Napoleon was this light living fountain, and when Goethe interacted with him, he was sort of almost blinded, and here he is years later. What are we here? 1825. So we're like a decade on from Waterloo. And Goethe is just trying to grasp with this character that he interacted with, like the sheer force of him. I don't know if you have anything else on that. Because I think it's a bit all over the place.
Well, whenever I think of all of like the idea of the great man, and then I was recently reading Tolstoy.
Yes, actually, which is the great repudiation of it, right?
Yeah, and I still don't know where I stand. Kind of doubtful of both.
What would you say? Because Napoleon, of course, is the character Tolstoy goes for as well. He's like, for me, Tolstoy still needs to create the foil around Napoleon.
Yeah.
And the novel doesn't work without it. So I think he kind of defeats his own purpose there slightly. I'm not saying it's a bad novel, but I think in terms of complete repudiation of great man theory, I think it's a failure because, yes, people go about their own lives and that they are of their own importance within that. But, you know, to conceptualize his art, to create that art or anything of lasting effect, you still need that the sun to in which you revolve around, you know, to put the mechanisms into play. Napoleon needs to exist for the plot of War and Peace to unravel.
Right, that's true.
Yeah. Napoleon inhabiting the realm of ideas. I can see why Goethe found that. I think he found that aspect of Napoleon's character so appealing that he is kind of ignoring other aspects of the man's character. I don't think he inhabited wholly the realm of ideas, though he was aware how to cultivate an image of himself. 267. How little of all that has happened has been recorded in writing. How little of this corpus of writings has been preserved. By its very nature, literature is fragmentary. It contains monuments of the human spirit insofar as these constitute written texts and have ultimately survived.
I like that one.
So this one's a little more. These are from Art and Antiquity. This one's a little more antiquity. I think of Pound when he wrote that fragmentary poem, as if it was, as if it were sort of an unearthed fragment.
Which one are you talking about now?
Let me try and see if I can find it. But yeah, I think it is literally just called Fragment.
Okay.
So it's very short, and it just goes.
Are you in a station at the metro? Is that the one?
No, but it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
I have felt the lithe wind blowing under one's figure, sinuous. I'm not sure that's. I think he's trying to be like Sappho there. But there was one where it's like he's literally like he creates. It's almost like he wrote a full. It's quite small, like, but it's almost like he wrote a full poem, but then like singed out. He creates that effect of like certain words being singed out, and they're on the tip of your tongue, but you don't know how it came together. And I think what he was trying to do, Pound, is he was feeling the same way Goethe is feeling here. That there was
Yeah.
this. It contains the monuments of a human spirit, and even though everything is kind of fragmentary that comes down to us, even I think people talk about fragmentation and dislocation of like truth, and we live in a post-truth world. But for someone like Goethe here, he's saying, well, literature and all of this stuff was always coming to us as something fragmentary, and we're trying to piece things back together. So, in some ways, you could say that isn't a new experience for man to have to deal with all these.
I think the difference is like Goethe always did believe in a abstract truth, and maybe people, more modern people with more modern ideas, believe in it entirely as a construct. I'd be more on Goethe's side.
Yes, so would I. It is a good way to think, though, about when you're reading any literature that even if you have quite a full text, Tolstoy's War and Peace, like what will that be to someone in 1,000 years? I think of Varro, who was meant to have inspired Virgil a lot. He was known as this extremely prolific writer, one of the most prolific in Rome. And all we have of his now is this tiny tract on farming, basically, like how to tend your farm. What state will people inherit War and Peace? Will they still be able to get a truth from it?
Well, I think
in a fragmentary state.
More like a lot of things will be preserved through like technology, more so. But it is interesting, yeah. And also, like, will it get the attention? Like, there'll be so much content. It'll be almost everything will be drowned in a sea of, because everything will be.
Will that continue?
I think so.
The sort of things getting drowned in abundance.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it could collapse again into a more narrow path.
It's it made me think of like there's like a library in Egypt, and there's a lot of ancient texts there that have almost like they only have one copy of the codex. Like there's no other, and these are ancient texts, and like there's like pigeons like fly into the library, and there's all these like ancient books that are being slowly decaying, and
just turning to dust.
Yeah, or the
it's a powerful image.
The Gospel of Thomas was found in the 50s or 60s in North Africa or Syria or something, and it was like they have ancient books that they use as a support for houses as a foundation.
Oh yes, this is Hyatt mentions that as well in his classical tradition when he talks about dark ages being possible. That the foundation, or what would be under the footing of a front door, would sometimes be a tablet from ancient Greek or ancient Egyptian times. Which, could be tax treaty or something, but it could be a work of profound art. And up until the late 60s, even people in these northern African towns, villages, who were using these as foundation stones themselves were illiterate.
Yeah.
Which I remember was a powerful image. So I've got the next one. The question as to which of the two is greater, the historian or the poet, should not even be raised. They do not compete with one another, as little as does the runner with the boxer. To each is due his own crown.
I would agree. What number was that? Sorry.
270.
Yeah, I would agree. They have
I'm trying to think of.
different ambitions. They're trying to achieve different effects.
Yes, I mean,
If if
there's
if,
the
if
point at
they've done
which.
their if they've done what they've intended, if they've achieved all they've intended and more, they would have vastly different outcomes.
I think
Bodies of work.
the stratification of the professions in our own age, as it reached such an extent, I'm struggling to actually get why it's a problem. Goethe is stating this as a maxim, as if it's something a lot of people get wrong, whereas the
So it's
poet
just
and the
become
historian
almost
nowadays,
it's just a truism.
yes, but it's almost just like, yeah, why would you mention that? Yeah. No, but I kind of can see why. Like, again, he's right at the end of that age where a poet could possibly write a historical epic,
Hmm.
or Edmund Spenser, when he writes The Faerie Queen, he has large tracks in which he'll deviate from his
Well,
plot, which was the
I think it is true that the mind loves to categorize, right, and rank order. So in like easel painting, they had historical. The historical work was the best, and then portraiture, and then landscape, and then still life was the lowest of below. But who's to say? So there's certain like there's a French still life artist who I thought was amazing, Carpeau or something. But I used to say Carpeau because he has something different in he's intending on some achieving a different effect than kind of the history painting. So
well, then
who's to
where do you
say?
draw the line, though? Because now people will rank painters as being within the same category.
Right. Fair.
Um, it's kind of like someone then going to Goethe and going, well, yeah, but don't even put all historians in the same category, because a military historian is going to be very different to social historian.
Right.
There has to be
But
one point at which we compare people to each other.
right.
And what
No,
he's saying,
I would say it's somewhat right, but it's a bit it's a bit unfair to be critical of somebody who's done something great and it's almost a pointless exercise to critique, just to like write off somebody who's achieved something great in a certain section of a certain field because it's not as like it has its own individual value, and it's in that way it's unique.
I suppose you could link it back to the way he talks about beauty, was the second one we had today.
Mm.
Beauty is a manifestation of secret natural laws. You're saying that sort of stuff is getting, we are introduced to that. So once that has occurred, ranking it with something else which has revealed itself in a similar manner is kind of pointless, because it's like the revelation of the beauty or the revelation of the act. That was the occurrence of significance. And then you're entering pedantry, or you're entering some sort of devolved state by then trying to do a post hoc comparison.
Yeah.
280. The only way to see absurdities of the day in proportion is to compare them with great masses of world history. So he's still on the comparison theme here. The only way to see absurdities of the day is to. So he's saying, well, okay, he didn't go as far as us in the last one. He was talking about the artist and the historian, and don't compare them. Here he's saying, do compare absurdities of the day in proportion of with the great masses of world history. So he's saying you can compare things that are absurd.
Yeah, it's
Don't
kind of
compare
like
two great things. But go ahead.
it's kind of like that Blake thing. You know, infinities in an hour, or eternally in a grain of sand, and infinity in an hour. It's seeing like I think it's something he probably did himself. Well, like, and anyone would naturally do if you're reading um if you're reading something and then something that mimics that in a microcosm, it'll like stimulate that thought process, right?
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with like the great masses of world history. I don't know what he means by the great masses, though. It's just like he means the great works, or does he just mean
Yeah,
this something more
translated poorly from the German. I don't know.
possibly? But if he means great works, there for me, that saying means something quite different to if he means, as you say, like if mass
Well,
is
great
sort of
mass
infinity,
movements, like great changes, like
great
maybe like
upheaval,
a mass, like an individual object, like changing over time, like great,
great
it's great
mass. A
shift.
mass is in this big significant thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
objects shifting.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought originally, and then I doubted myself. But okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's yeah. It's kind of like I think in the one I listened back to some of the earlier ones we did, and in the first one possibly he goes for maxims which kind of relate to we can define things by their deficiencies, or there's through the irregularities of something is where its definition is almost. And here I think he's kind of getting at the same thing from a different angle, where he's saying we can spot an absurdity in relation to the great masses of history and know it's an absurdity, but we
Right.
can't necessarily then spot something great immediately.
Yeah, I see that.
It's something to think about. I'm not sure it's true. I think you can spot something
You
great.
you
You
read a
can be
lot
struck
more
by it.
you read a lot more history than I do. And do you ever like read a particular chapter in history and then see something similar play out in your day in your day today?
Yes, but parallel micro occurrences, I think, is definitely one way you can read history, right? You can know history doesn't repeat itself in the sense that the whole thing's going to happen again,
But
because the initial
you
initial conditions are never going to be the same
right.
ever.
You can't have a Pyrrhic victory.
But yes, well, you can have the concept of Pyrrhic victory. It won't be like the battle Pyrrhus was in.
Wasn't he decapitated in the end?
Later, I'm not sure how
I
the
think that's
exact
how he
details of
died.
his demise.
He was decapitated on this. Yeah.
Is he dealt with in Plutarch? Because that's something I want to do later.
He
Is
was, yeah.
sink my teeth into Plutarch.
He's one of his characters.
But yeah, no, I think more the way you look at history is not for direct parallels, but think of it like when if you boiled two different three-dimensional objects down to two dimensions, they can look the same. So if you do dimensional reduction on something, they look the same. You can compare them.
Right.
Think of a cylinder and a circle, right? If you look at a cylinder from a certain angle in a two-dimensional plane, it'll look exactly like a circle. So then you can compare it to the circle.
Or a rectangle. Yeah.
A rectangle and a square, right? But Yeah. So if you do dimensional reduction, i.e., strip away the things that are obviously different in history, then I think that you can find a plane sometimes where you can find analogies in history with what you're experiencing today, or this passage looks like from this history looks like that other thing that happened later in history. So I think that's the correct way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Volume 5, Issue 3, still individual points, but we're in 1826. He's a year older, is he a year wiser? Let's find out. 281. You really only know when you know little. Doubt grows with knowledge.
That's what's it called? There's a popular term for that.
The more you know, the less you know.
Yeah, they almost have I've seen it, like they got it on a chart, and you start out with a certain amount of confidence. And then
Sometimes though, there's like a saddle point. You realize you know nothing at the start. Then you start to think you know everything, and then the more you learn, then you realize you know nothing again. It's a bit more circular, maybe, than what he's saying here, which is just straight away. Yeah, you know when you know little. But I
do think doubt grows with knowledge. I agree with that.
Yeah, doubt grows with knowledge is a good little vignette. But knowledge doesn't grow with doubt.
Right. Well, I think your propensity to doubt allows you to think in new ways. Like if you don't have the
mindset,
if you don't have the ability to doubt, you'll stay within the confines of thought structures that you occupy.
But what about a sense of exploration that actually has very little doubt in it? It's just this want of discovery.
Yeah. Right.
That's what I was thinking of when I said doubt couldn't lead to knowledge, but knowledge can lead to doubt.
I get you.
You get me, but I'm wrong, is it?
No,
I just you doubt me.
I do. No, I don't. I don't. I just think it's coming out of
Yeah, there's been some heavy hitting ones in this. I think he really cranked them up, because I think in the last one there's like can't turn curd into cream and sort of stuff. Like here, it's heavy duty. I did 283, which is sort of Latin saying, bonus vir semper tiro. Links to the one we just talked about. A good man is always a beginner. So kind of, I think what he's getting at there as well, like when you know little is when you know, sort of thing. But I think he's sort of treating. He doesn't want to think that as something like of ignorance, right?
There's always more to learn.
Yes, always treat yourself as a beginner in something, and that will keep your eyes open, and you won't
miss it. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, well, like it's a guard against complacency as well. I don't know if you have anything else against that. I think I just liked it because it was also in Latin.
No, I like it.
Like put away a Latin to whip out a Latin phrase every now and then is kind of good. So bonus vir semper tiro is that one. 296. Only someone to whom the present is important writes a chronicle. So again, it's about we touched upon the themes of this, right? How does the past play into the present? How do you collect the past? How is the past then revealed to us through fragments and so on? So this is just another one of that. Only someone to whom the present is important writes a chronicle.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
What do you think he means by that? Right.
The way I can interpret it, which is most favorable to him, is the person thinking the present is important isn't actually thinking about the present being important, as in he's not completely absorbed with the present, but he's thinking about the present being an important point in some future's past, if that makes sense. So I'm living through this moment.
Does he mean
All
only
people in the future are going to find
only
this really important, and
only
so I
somebody
begin chronicling.
only somebody who values the direction in which the present is heading?
But someone who's completely obsessed with the present, I think, is so obsessed with the present. Why would they write a chronicle? They wouldn't have any, consideration for that, because you have to have the consideration.
I think he means somebody who's worried about where the direction the present is heading. That's the way he means it.
Okay. So
would
only someone to whom the direction of travel for the present is important writes a chronicle. You would amend that.
Yeah.
Direction. Yeah. Well, I think
the future.
That's fair.
Yeah.
To be concerned about the direction of the present, I think, is quite natural, and I think in the age we live in as well, like, to be a guard against this sort of hubris, this idea that man has conquered all of these other things that, we used to think like that, but now that's sort of pathetic. Oh, that view is what I want to try combat in my life. And yeah, think about the trajectory the present is on in relation to the past, but not to be, I suppose when I see like someone thinks the present is important, I'm on my guard not to be the, self-absorbed in the present. But I get your point. And yeah, it probably agrees more with Goethe's character that we've seen revealed to us through these maxims. 300. We like to rate antiquity higher than ourselves, but not posterity. It's only a father who doesn't envy a son's talent.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, we've mentioned themes around this.
But yeah.
Go on. Do you have a point?
Yeah. I mean, if there was like some great figure in your age, say like a Samuel Johnson or someone, like, and you say you were present, like you lived in London in the same period, you'd be small minded not to rate him highly also.
Yes. I'm just conscious we're approaching the hour, and I'll try wrap up on a close of a volume, which is actually a bit away. So we'll kind of crack through that, and we'll just spitball these.
Perfect.
303, because I think we've dealt a lot about the consideration of past and future and present. So sometimes he's phrasing them in nice ways. So we'll read them out, but in terms of elaboration, maybe it won't be the most beneficial thing right now. 303. All we devise and do is exhausting. Happy the man who doesn't get weary. I don't know if that applies as much to today's age, when leisure is no longer a luxury. It's almost a default setting for some.
Yeah, for most.
But in Goethe's time, yes, if he sees the hard, toiling, working man, you can see why he came up with this maxim. Anything else to add there?
Yeah, well, he's saying happy the man who doesn't get weary. But it doesn't imply necessarily that the man who doesn't get weary isn't working.
Okay, so
he could still be working.
There's a distinction there between being exhausted and being weary.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important distinction, actually. Rereading it there, yeah. There's an exhaustion which you want in life that doesn't make you weary. And that's kind of what you need to strive for in a prudent labor. Talked about Carlyle's obsession with labor. Yeah, it's sort of an overlap there. 304, quote. Now, I don't know why this is in quotes, because I don't know who quoted it. Who he's quoting, rather. Hope is the second soul of those who are unfortunate.
Does that sound like Dante?
Let me just see if I can find out who it is. Meanwhile, how would you define hope? Do you agree with what he's saying there? It's a difficult thing to kind of define, I suppose.
Is for a I don't know, improvement of, what was that?
An improvement of conditions.
Yeah, or a kind of rebalancing. A belief in justice.
I'm not getting exactly who it is, but I think we're in a stage where he was obsessed with Schiller's work. I'm not sure if it was Schiller himself. A second soul. It's a quotation anyway, so I won't get too much into it. 318. If you can seek out good advice, it's as though you yourself have the capacity for action. I think that's fairly true, and still today, that's a good thing to have. Don't wait for advice to come to you. Go out and seek it, and then you will obtain it more likely. Would you agree?
Yeah. Don't remain passive.
He linked that back to an earlier one. I'm sorry, I'm going to link it back to an earlier one that he said, where he said, "You don't get to know somebody until you go out and talk to them. You know, someone comes to you, you don't really get to know them." Which I kind of disagreed with on the time, but if he's tackling it from this angle, that you yourself, without getting bogged down into knowing the other, you go out and seek something. I think that is certainly where you find action, where you find more meaning and more fruition. 332. Everyone suffers who doesn't act for himself. This is a similar theme. One acts for others so as to share in their enjoyment. So what's he saying there? Everyone suffers who doesn't act for himself. That's quite. I suppose if you never act for yourself, there's a way of
Sounds
looking.
Sounds like Ayn Rand.
It does a bit, and I'm trying to take it back from there, back from that precipice. But the second sentence jars with the first there. One acts for others so as to share in their enjoyment. That's caring. That's not acting for yourself. Is why? Because you're sharing in their enjoyment. That's still
So they're
like
saying
a
you're
level
innately, even when you're being selfless, you're doing it too. It will always be from
well, you're never going to do something that makes you entirely
self
miserable.
gratification. So, yeah, I just don't agree with that. I think that's
No.
very enlightened.
I think I highlighted it because it was just like, this is bold. This is a bold statement. And I've highlighted the next one, so let's see if it agrees at all with it. 333. What is conceivable belongs to the realm of the senses and the understanding. Oh no, I highlighted that because it's very Emersonian.
332 or 333?
333. Right. What is conceivable belongs to the realm of the senses and the understanding. Adjoining this is propriety, which is related to seemliness. Propriety, however, is a condition belonging to a particular time and to a definite set of circumstances. But it's the first sentence in particular there that caught my eye. What is conceivable belongs to the realm of senses and the understanding. Whereas, what's the Emerson quote? It's like, my noon is the England of the senses and the understanding. My night is the Germany of mysticism and of dreams. So it reminded me of that Emerson quote, which I love. So I was kind of like, oh, like this is like the Goethe element in it that shines later in Emerson.
Mm.
But of course, what was ironic was Goethe being the German, doesn't add the bit about mysticism and dreams, but only adds the bit that Emerson associates with the English.
That is interesting.
Highlighted a passage. 345 is a beast. I've highlighted bits of it, but I'll read the whole thing out. Oh no, sorry, 346 rather. 346. Battle of what is old, established, continuous, against development, against further or against new formation, always remains the same. All order finally issues in pedantry. To get rid of the latter, one destroys the former, and it takes a while before people realize that there has got to be a return to order. Classicism and Romanticism, domination by guilds and demand for free trade, tenacious clinging to the shattering of basic foundations. It is always the same conflict, which in the end always creates a new one. A ruler's most sensible procedure would therefore be to moderate this battle, so that without destruction of any one side, it reaches a point of balance. But this isn't given to man, and God doesn't seem to want it either. I thought that was quite a powerful one. We're talking about the balancing act, this eternal battle. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
are we always
well, I think
doing
a
the same balancing act? Is that at the heart
perfect,
of our struggle?
perfect balance is stagnation. Like if an object isn't
yeah, you almost
moving.
feel at the end what he's describing there, if like the state of perfect balance is, it's almost becoming a sort of purgatory.
Mm-hmm.
It
would be, yeah.
It's not something you would
feel like,
want to be wished.
We are kind of in history and in movement.
Well, you talk about finding that balance, right? You can call that the hubris of Fukuyama and the end of history as well. That they thought they were in that moment that Goethe describes here, but actually no, the scale gets tipped again. I think he's trying to square a lot of, he calls it out by name here, classicism and romanticism. Because you said earlier, I think back when we started this, would you categorize Goethe as a romantic? And I said no, because too much of the classicist is still in him. He straddles those ages. So I think this Maxim here is him coming to deal with that, because romanticism is a reaction against classicism, which had seen to become an order which had metastasized in pedantry. Yes, it came later to Germany in general, so they weren't perhaps as stale as other countries were in terms of like what it had become this boilerplate formula. And so he's left in this in-between point. And I think he is kind of being like, can't we all be friends? Can't we find this balancing, everything in the balance? But I think you're right. When you read it, it doesn't read like a life you would want to live, right?
Yeah. I mean, no, I do like the quote a lot. He says as well, God doesn't seem to want it either. He says, but this isn't given to man, and God doesn't seem to want it either.
That's because what he's saying is the battle is eternal and renews itself constantly. Yeah. So that's what he says.
God. I'm wondering if he's saying innately in man. I'm wondering if he's also saying innately in man that man also doesn't want it. He's saying either. That both God.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean there.
Yeah.
Again, the translation. Yeah, but it's not given to man. But does man want it? Irrelevant to whether it's given or not, does he want it? And that's kind of, Goethe hasn't gone there, really. He's alluded to it, but he hasn't gone there. I think it's an interesting one to leave people thinking about. 350. You don't have to censure vulgarity, for this remains eternally true to itself. I think you do.
I mean,
I think if he saw some of the stuff we've seen in our lives.
Yeah.
Because what we said, we no longer have the ideas of beauty that he has, that he holds. So if you
Yeah,
hold,
and
if you hold
maybe,
something
but
that's,
maybe,
go
yeah,
on.
maybe there was no need to censor it when they held sway, right? And maybe the reason why there's such a wave of vulgarity is because they no longer hold sway.
Yeah, I think he's he's living in a realm, talking about the realm of ideas. He's living in a realm where beauty is so, the idea of understanding and respecting beauty when you see it is so encompassing to him that he's like, well, there's no need to censor vulgarity,
Mm.
because he already has the guiding lights. You know, the shadows themselves are always going to be in the shade when you have the guiding light. The problem is, what about when the light goes out, or what about when you can no longer
Yeah,
discern
but
one from the
then
other?
you would say that the problem is the light going out. The problem isn't necessarily with the censoring. Like, you know what I mean? That's a
Would you agree with that saying, or are you just saying it
secondary,
as a devil's advocate situation?
kind of devil's advocate. Like, I mean, I don't like the idea of censorship in general, but I think within the social, like not in not in a
Well, when
governmental.
he's using the word censure here, I think he's just meaning extreme disapproval.
Yeah, no, I agree with. I agree with. Well, what he's saying then is more
He's not
that.
thinking of a political sense.
Yes, I suppose I'm misinterpreting it then. Well, what I would agree with him then, but I think he's saying that when um, when somebody says something incredibly vulgar, often people won't say a thing to them because they don't need to, and the person is almost left ignorant, but of
But
their
again,
own vulgarity.
we go back to that idea of natural emotional reactions were ones that are thought out. I think there's a natural emotional reaction to like something you find repugnant. You will find it difficult to disguise your reaction to that. You know,
But,
have you then censored vulgarity, which he doesn't want to be done here?
I mean, I suppose if you care about a person, you would want to correct them, right? If somebody within your family or something said something vulgar, your natural instinct would be to correct them, right? But if a stranger or someone you don't have that relationship with were to say it, you maybe don't feel you have the right to or have the need to.
No, not to say something, but I'm saying there will probably, you can teach yourself. But, you know, some people will do it more naturally than others. But I think, you know, you walk past someone who smells in the street, some people will
To,
make a
to be,
face whether they want to or not.
yeah, but to be honest, I don't agree with it. I think you do. I think it I think it does need to be a censure is
Okay, okay.
needed.
I think I know it was an
I
interesting
think
one.
I, I think we
It had more
probably
legs, that
probably
Maxim, than I thought.
probably a lack of censure is uh, is a problem.
So we've got 6 left. We'll try to get through them. You ask which form of government is the best? Whichever teaches us to govern ourselves.
What number is that?
Quite liberal. Oh, that's 353.
Yeah, I mean, whichever teaches to govern ourselves. If you emphasize that, and you could almost say that people, a modern interpretation of that would be um, maybe is not what he intended. Maybe he means that we, if you are ungovernable, if you are kind of barbaric, or you are, um, you know,
Yeah,
uncultivated,
I
whatever.
don't think it's an extremist take in his own time as well. The well, if I use the word tentacles, it's going to be already a loaded term. But if, you know, the tentacles of government really couldn't intrude a lot of people's lives to the extent it
Right,
can today.
right,
So you have to learn how to govern yourself. If I'm thinking of Goethe's time, right? If you're not governing yourself, you're drunk on the street, and then you get whipped up into a press gang and sent off to war. That's Goethe's world.
right.
I think that's what's leading him the state of line like this, right?
Yeah. Yes, but what I'm saying is that he doesn't necessarily mean representative democracy.
Oh no, no.
He could
He
easily be
means,
talking about.
he means like in your daily life, are you able to be in control of what's going to happen when you know, your job or are you self-sufficient, I suppose, is a way of
Yeah.
looking at it. And yeah, he's not thinking about, do you get to write on a bit of paper and then a man sits in a chair in a far off capital. There. 356. When men drag women around with them, they will be spun off as though from a distaff. I think I just highlighted that out of humor.
What's a distaff?
What is a distaff? I'm picturing stick. Let me have a look. A stick or spindle on which wool or flax is wound for spinning.
Oh, I see.
Does that give it a new meaning?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. So it's a second as a modifier. I'm seeing here in the dictionary is as modifier. A distaff means of or concerning women. An example: marriage is still the passport to distaff power.
To what
I don't know if
female?
that double meaning exists in German or if Goethe was going for that.
I don't. Men drag women around.
Why'd you highlight this garbage? Is it?
Uh,
I think I just liked how
when he says they, is he talking about the male or the female?
when men drag, they will be spun off.
Both.
So, ooh, I pictured the woman, but actually,
did they plural?
they must be both.
Because he would say he or she otherwise.
Well, this was an age of the separate dining rooms, right? Well, you dined together, but then the drawing rooms, rather, right? So the men would then talk in the dining room, and the women would withdraw after dinner to the drawing room. And there was this much greater idea of the separation between the two. So maybe he's talking like you would organize something, and then he's dragging his woman along and shove the pair of them.
Maybe he's saying when couples get together, they.
Oh yeah. What's the modern term for like when your friend gets whipped or whatever? Is that the term?
That's the term. No, I wouldn't even say whipped. I mean, like he's saying that they both kind of
infatuated with each other, and then the rest of the world doesn't exist.
Yeah. They kind of are blinded. But it's really easy to misinterpret that one, right?
To be honest, I think I did it for humor. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I'll try drop this stuff into everyday conversation tomorrow. 362. Vis superba forme. The superb strength of form. Which is just a quote, an attractive formulation by Johann Secundus. So again, I think I was just looking for those Latin phrases. Whenever he came up with them, I was like, cool, sounds good. Which reminds me of, it's like vos ergo perfecti or something like this. Is be perfect was Matthew Arnold's mantra, which kind of reminds me of vis superba forme, superb strength of form. There's such strength to a maxim, I think, when it's in Latin. Do you have anything to add to that?
No.
There is superb strength of form. Quite Greek ideal, isn't it?
Yeah, I just think about sculpture.
You do. You think of sculpture. 367. There is nothing more dreadful than active ignorance.
You mean conscious ignorance?
Yeah, I think we talked about how Aristotle classes these things. I think he has the same. Like, is there an active ignorance? Can you be actively ignorant of something, or can you only be passively ignorant of something?
You can definitely be actively ignorant. I think you will, like willfully.
Willfully ignorant. Yeah. Nothing more dreadful than it. I think, well, it's like, think about Goethe as like the Renaissance man that he is, Renaissance man par excellence, right? So if he did see somebody being actively ignorant, I think he would just find that abhorrent.
Mm.
Anything else to add?
No.
Is there something more dreadful than active ignorance? I suppose there is.
Yes.
You can be malignant. You can be.
But I suppose active ignorance will lead to gradually
Ignorance of
more
others. Yeah.
worse things. Like it as a trait, if it expounds, say in a culture or in an individual, it leads to worse things.
We'll do 368. You have to distance yourself from beauty and intelligence if you don't want to become their vassal. It's like being a slave to beauty.
I understand. Yeah.
Do you agree with that? Can you become a slave to beauty? Slaves to intelligence are more difficult.
No, I think you can be overly intellectual.
We'll close it off with 372. My experience with the natural sciences is like that of a man who gets up early and then in the dusky light of dawn impatiently awaits the early brightness of the sky, and yet is blinded when the sun actually appears.
It's like that.
372. Any parting take from the last maxim of the evening?
It's interesting, but I'm trying to. What do you take from it?
Well, he talked earlier about the torch being blinding and the torch being truth.
Right.
I think he's just using that. My experience with the natural sciences is like that of a man who gets up early, and then I think he's saying the same thing, right? The truth can be blinding, but because he's talking about his experience with the natural sciences, he's decided to throw in a more natural metaphor. So he talks about a man getting up early.
Also, the blinding could also kind of relate to being confounded by the problems of science and the inability to solve them.
Well, you can lead that back to his other maxim.
Right.
That doubt grows with knowledge.
Hmm.
He starts off the day ignorant. The sun rises. He's learning more, and then yet he's at the end. By the end, he's blinded. Right. This is the doubt coming in. He's blinded when the sun actually appears. When he is knee deep in that work of natural sciences, he kind of loses himself.
Hmm. I see. Yeah.
Happy to wrap it up there.
Perfect. Yeah.
Well, man, till the next time and the broadcast.
Okay.
See you guys.
See ya.